Hello, and welcome to the Cycle Endometriosis podcast, where we will delve deep into experiences, challenges, and triumphs of those navigating a life with endometriosis. Join us as we share the stories of resilience, offer insights from experts, and foster a community of support for those affected by this often misunderstood condition. Whether you're newly diagnosed, a seasoned warrior, or seeking understanding, I hope this podcast is here to help empower you and uplift you on your journey. Tune in as we break the silence, shatter stigmas, and amplify the voices of the endometriosis community. Medical disclaimer: this podcast is not intended for the purpose of providing medical advice. All information, content, and material of this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to serve as a substitute for the consultation, diagnosis, and/or medical treatment of a qualified physician or healthcare provider. Thank you so much for being here, and now on to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of the Cycle Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I'd like to welcome our guest, Sarah Ray, here today, who's a nutritionist and a dietitian. Can't wait to chat with you today, Sarah, about all things endo and food, but you're also an endo patient. So I'm excited to dive into your story and learn more about your story and what has led you down the path to where you are today. But first and foremost, welcome. Thank you for being here. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of this community and have the opportunity to share my story and give hopefully a few actionable little tidbits that people can take away on how to focus for nutrition for endo.
We can't wait to learn all about that. Why don't you start off just by telling us a little bit about yourself? Anything you'd like to share, personal, professional?
Yeah, so I am a Pacific Northwest Seattle resident. I grew up in Washington, have always been here, and I don't love the rain. I'm also a mom and really love cooking. That's how I got into being a dietitian and love taking like walks. So I live near the beach, so that's really fun. So yeah, that's kind of like what you will find me doing, hanging out with my kiddo or walking with my family or making a delicious meal.
All of those things sound fabulous. And I also love the beach, and rain's okay, but you probably get a lot more than what we're used to over here in Michigan. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, we get our fair amount here in Seattle.
Yeah. Always have the raincoat on hand.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, I'd love to hear more about, your endometriosis journey, maybe when things started to feel different for you, or how you even started to get on the path of knowing that you had endo.
Yeah. So kind of looking back through my journey, I think I probably had endo symptoms even before I even started my periods. That's really been an interesting part of motherhood is I think I'm seeing some of these things in my daughter and kind of reflecting back on my childhood. And I really had gut health issues from the very beginning, and I had pain from my very first period. I came from a family history of that. My mom had painful periods. And so it was just kind of always normal in my family. That was just kind of like, this is the cards we're dealt. You take Tylenol on your period rest if you need to. Like my mom was understanding to it, but there wasn't really any question about it because it was just normal. And then in college, I started having a lot of like breakthrough bleeding on birth control. I spoke with some of my doctors about pelvic pain, and they would do like a pelvic ultrasound, run some labs. They always tested me for STIs, and it was like everything is normal. Let's try a different birth control. And so I would try it, and then just kind of like I think I've tried all of those things. And with the pelvic pain, it was like here's a like how-to guide on like foreplay. It was like
Oh
this is
my
something you're doing
gosh.
wrong, like not something that is unusual to experience. So I kind of stopped seeking answers and just kind of accepted that this was my fate. And then when I was 29, I decided, I don't know, I just like feel like my body knew something was brewing, and it was like, I need to have a baby like right now. I don't know. It was like this. I always wanted to have kids, but it was like a flip switch. Like my clock is ticking, and like, what if something is wrong? And so I was always really interested in being a fertility dietitian, and my career path hadn't led me to that yet, but I went on this like very clean eating journey, like really focused on exercise. It was like my New Year's resolution for that year was like, this is the year of wellness and the year of me. And I really worked on some of that. And I think with that, I started feeling really well, and we started trying to get pregnant. And then I wasn't getting pregnant. And I went back to my provider and was like, what's happening? And they said, you know, you have to wait a year. Like, there's nothing wrong. We've done these ultrasounds, like, kind of just wait it out. And I got pregnant. So I really didn't think anything of it again. Like, endometriosis was never on my radar.
Sure.
And then after I had my daughter, my symptoms got really, really severe, and where like my back pain was so much that I couldn't hardly push the stroller around the neighborhood. And I was extremely fatigued. I wasn't tolerating a lot of foods. I had endo belly all the time, and I was bleeding all the time. And it was just like,
Sorry.
I couldn't imagine a world where I could get pregnant again in that state. I couldn't imagine a world living, like raising more than one child with like the lack of sleep and just like feeling horrible all the time. I already wasn't sleeping because of the back pain. And so I had tried kind of all of the birth controls at that point, and my depression had really upticked where I was starting to have thoughts of self-harm. And I told my provider, like, I can't do this anymore. And so they said, well, the next step is really a hysterectomy, and you're pretty young for that. And I was just like, sign me up. Like, this, I can't live this way.
Yeah.
I'm fine not having more children.
Yeah.
Like, my mom had one and she felt great after. Like, I'm ready for my card.
Right. Right. And
And
then at that point, though, you still didn't even know you had endo.
I
Did
didn't.
you
And
just?
I asked her because I had a friend who had gone through some fertility issues, and she was about 10 years older than me. And it was like, when does endo come? Like, could I have endo? Like, I looked this up and I have a lot of the symptoms, and the provider said, yeah, you definitely could. And we've tried all of the traditional treatments for endo. And so surgery is really your last option. And to be fair, they did present the option of doing like a laparoscopy and just like finding out. But she really was like, hysterectomy is kind of going to make you feel better. And so I was like, well, if you're opening me up, just take the uterus out. I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
So kind of really misinformed at that time. I had like this idea of endo. And so when she confirmed that I could have it, I started doing some research. And when I was interviewing GYNs for the hysterectomy, I asked, are you going to take the endo out when you're in there? I'm reading that this can be other places. And she said, absolutely. So it was like, great, I'm not going to bleed anymore. We're going to get rid of the endo. Like, this is going to be a one and done. And I went forward with the surgery, and I felt amazing for like 3 months.
Yeah.
And then the pain all came back. I have my ovaries still. And I went back to the referring provider and said, I have cramps. Like, I have a period every month. I'm just not bleeding. And she said that that's not possible. You don't have a uterus anymore. And so that was when I really started looking into endo a little bit more. My sister was dealing with miscarriages at the time and kind of looking into that for herself. And I now had confirmed endo from my first surgery. They said they saw it. And that really started me on the path of kind of where I am in my career today. So I went on to have excision surgery and do some lifestyle management things. Pelvic floor dysfunction is a really big part of my journey and probably the biggest source of my pain that is left. And so that's something that I'm still like in PT every week and working on relaxation exercises, and pelvic floor Botox has been life-changing for me. So yeah, I think my story is very similar to what I hear with a lot of patients, and that it took years to get answers. Things were kind of minimized. I had to suggest endo to my provider before I got a diagnosis of it. And there's definitely a lot of grief. Now that I feel well, there's a lot of grief around the loss of fertility and being perimenopausal at age 34 because of my hysterectomy. And so, yeah, I feel so much better not bleeding, and I wish I still had my uterus.
Yeah. Sarah, I'm sorry that happened to you. For people who are listening who may be very new to endo, or maybe you're very experienced with endo, I think, Sarah, your story highlights exactly the headline that's out there very often, but unfortunately is still a kind of an old taboo myth that a hysterectomy is like a cure for endometriosis. And it's not. It doesn't, you still probably had the disease because you said you went on to have excision surgery, right? And so what happened when you had excision? I mean, I'm sure that they found multiple lesions in other
Yeah.
places.
Yeah. So when I went to my excision surgery consultation, she looked at my pathology report and said, well, you very likely have endo, but they didn't submit a single piece of pathology aside from your uterus in this report. So she took nothing out. She just flat out lied to you, to be honest. And she told me she got it all. She told my husband kind of where it was. And I think the frustrating thing is I went on to take kind of action with that provider, just not that I wanted her to lose her job, but like, you should know that this was a disservice to me. And I could not get any, like, I couldn't get the state to just like put a flag on there. I couldn't get a lawyer that would take the case. Like, we have as patients who have had surgeries that did not fix us, or we were given misinformation, like, there's no repercussions for that because hysterectomy is still considered like the standard of care for endometriosis.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not, I mean, people could potentially be having them and then still be in pain. And like you said, they lost their fertility and maybe they didn't need to.
And they were told that all of the endo was gone when none of it was taken out.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that this is something that just happened to you in recent years, we're not talking about 20 years ago. We're not talking about 15 years ago. We're talking about in the past 5 years.
Like 3 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's so frustrating. And I'm so sorry about that, the misinformation that you received. And so are those the only two surgical procedures you've had for endometriosis?
Yes. So my excision surgery was about a year and a half ago, and I did have a return of symptoms fairly quickly. Probably about 6 months after I started getting the bloating, and I think I had an increase in pelvic pain, like muscular pain that I could really feel in my hip from that. And I went back to my surgeon like, "Did you miss more?" Like, you're really traumatized
Yeah.
after
Yes.
that, and you kind of feel like almost like you're just ready for the next surgery. Like, when is it gonna be? Is it gonna have to be in 6 months? And I'm very thankful for the team that I have supporting me now. They recommended trying the Botox, which I
Hmm.
said, and that took away all of my cramping and all of my bloating. Like, it's amazing how we can hold so much tension in our pelvic floor and really feel like we still have endo. So I'm really grateful, and I would encourage people, if you're still having pain, rather than seeking new providers, to actually go back to your first provider and kind of ask questions in that way. And hopefully, they will offer you things sometimes beyond
Yeah.
hormonal band-aids for that.
Yeah, for sure. I want to back up a little bit too, to go back to like middle school, high school, college that you mentioned. And, you said you think you've had, symptoms or something going on for a very, very long time. Can you describe some of those things? Like you even said gut health. Just for people who are listening that maybe they have someone in their life that's younger that might be going through this, I feel like always mentioning what the symptoms are because they're so different for so many people, in the younger years is very helpful, hopefully, in catching the disease sooner.
Yeah, so constipation was a really big one for me as a child, like having really large stools, difficulty passing stools, and then really bad bowel pain. I remember before I needed to go to the bathroom, I would just get this like shooting, stabbing pain and just be crumpled over. And then it was like once I went to the bathroom, I felt fine. So I never really like talked to my mom about it. It would usually be like you kind of feel that coming on, and then you're in the bathroom and it hurts, and then you go. Um, so that I've had as long as I can remember, and I don't know if I had adhesions, as a 10-year-old, but in both of my surgeries, my bowels have been stuck to my sidewall, and so that I think has been one of the big things. And in pelvic floor therapy now, they have said, like, it really feels like your bowel is not moving, like it's stuck. And so that was one of my early ones, was just like the constipation, the pain with bowel movements. Rectal bleeding was another one that kind of I struggled off and on with for like as long as I can remember, and the painful bloating. I remember as a kid being up in the night and my dad just like rubbing my belly, and it just hurt so bad. And they were like wondering if it was anxiety, which it could have been. Like, we know that can increase things, but yeah, it was really like that bowel pain. And then from my first period, I had that like really severe pressure. So it feels like everything's kind of trying to come out of your pelvis. I remember like playing softball in elementary school and standing out on the field and having this like, just felt like my legs were trying to separate kind of between, and in junior high, kind of like laying on the floor having cramps, and my friends just kind of being baffled by it and not experiencing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the inability to use a tampon. Like, all of my friends could use tampons, and I could not figure that out for the life of me. Like, I knew where the place was,
Yeah.
but I could not get it in.
No, because your body was like, nope. Nope. A lot of
And then
pain in
have
that area. Good. Not putting that in.
and like 7 to 14 day periods, like from the very get go, which they will kind of minimize early on, saying like your body needs to catch up to it. But I had to get on birth control as a 15-year-old finally to normalize that. So yeah, I always had lower back pain. Like, I was a runner through high school, and I was going to the chiropractor all the time for lower back and hip pain. So that was present from the beginning as well. And we just like, in our society, we just like keep adding these band-aids to like take some Tylenol for your period, or like take some fiber for your constipation, and like go get adjustments every week at the chiropractor for your back. But nobody's like, hey, like, what's causing all of these symptoms to happen?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you say that. I was listening to a podcast and I can't remember what it is right now, but if I do, I'll link it in the show notes. But it was saying like actually the segmenting of care is causing so many more issues because you're seeing one doctor for this, one doctor for that one. And
Yep.
if there was someone like holistically looking at everything, and I know that's kind of like family doctor, but they're sending you off to referrals to go see this specialist, that it's not treating the whole thing. Cause like for me, very much like you, tampons, I really struggled. I didn't understand. Like, my friends were like, what, this is so easy. And I didn't understand, cause I was like, this just doesn't work for me. So that was one of the things too. But I would see like a GI doctor, but I also, same as you, like would have an OBGYN doctor, and everything was so just treated separately. I never would have correlated that everything that I was going through was all related ever.
Mm-hmm.
I never would have thought that. And so I think the segmenting of healthcare, like you said, you're going to the chiropractor and this and that, really does a big disservice to a lot of patients, but especially endo patients, because the disease manifests in so many different ways.
Yeah. I think I was lucky compared to stories that I've heard from early on. My mom really taught me how to have confidence with talking to a doctor and healthcare professionals. I think I was gaslighted after my hysterectomy, but up until then, they were always like trying to find answers for me or offer a new solution.
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't the solution that we now know is what can help with pelvic pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I definitely think there's not like a lack of trying, but yeah, exactly. I want to dig into the Botox a little bit. There might be people that are listening that haven't tried this or might be nervous about trying this. Can you tell us just like a little bit about what the process is and how it works and
Yeah.
how you feel? And I think that would be very helpful for people who are maybe considering it.
Yeah. So my provider had me do a few things kind of before we went that route. So one thing is pelvic floor Botox is generally not covered for pelvic pain. There are some things that it will be covered for. So as a part of like my constipation and my tight pelvic floors, I chronically get anal fissures. And I've had this one that like is taking years to heal, and my colorectal provider had recommended it probably a year ago, but they said I could lose bowel continence. And I'm like, well, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really scary. And so
Yeah.
I just didn't even consider it. And they said, likely it's not going to be covered by insurance. You can do this like other surgery. So I continued in pelvic floor therapy, working on like the whole thing, like the rectum, vagina, my hips, like all of it weekly. And I just cannot make progress. Like, we all live human lives and could be better about following up through with the exercises and things like that. But have been like really intensive on it. So that was the first step, was get in with pelvic floor therapy and see what you can do from there.
Sure.
And then I started with some muscle relaxer suppositories,
Mm-hmm.
and some oral muscle relaxers, which were also really helpful. It was super helpful for sleep with hip pain and things like that.
Okay.
So that was all kind of overseen by my endometriosis specialist, but I think colorectal also was happy to oversee that as well. And then when I really wasn't making gains with that in terms of like, tolerating sex well and being able to release bowel movements. So one thing that I think isn't talked about enough in pelvic tightness is like, if you're not getting clean very easily after you go to the bathroom, that's a sign that you have a lot of tension. Or if you're not letting things out all the way, that is a sign of tension. Or if you're peeing all the time. So I was having a lot of those issues.
Sure.
And so my provider recommended it and kind of described the process, which is basically unmedicated. They're going in with a needle and injecting Botox into your pelvic floor. And I'm not afraid of needles,
Okay.
but I am afraid of more pelvic pain.
Yes.
So
I bet you were very nervous the first time that happened.
yeah, like I don't do well with speculum. So I'm
No.
like, how am I gonna? And she said, you have to hold really, really still for the procedure so that it like goes where it is. And so I think there are places that will do it under sedation, but they're kind of trying to feel your trigger areas. So they need
Sure.
you to be awake.
Just be awake, yeah.
So it took me a lot of build up to get to that
Yeah.
point, but I was kind of tired of not making progress with the pelvic pain. And so, yeah, they go in, they do an internal exam, and they kind of feel around your whole pelvic floor for where those trigger areas are. And they will ask about your specific symptoms. So for me, my obturator is like a chronic spot. And then I don't have the word for it now, but we have like a sling of a muscle that holds the poop in when we're not ready to go, and then it relaxes. And so mine was also very tight, puborectalis. And so that was one thing my PT was like, I can never move this thing. Like it is just tight around there. And so they were also going to work on that. So yeah, I had a doctor and a nurse like holding my hand, and I'm in the stirrups, and they gave me the numbing medication that you get like similar to at the dentist. Like that is how my vulva felt for hours after the strangest
Oh my
thing.
gosh. Yeah, I bet.
And then so they kind of like try to do a local anesthetic, and then they go in and they inject in all of those
Multiple
trigger
locations.
areas.
Sure.
I did not birth my daughter vaginally, so I can't compare to that, but it was probably one of the most painful things I have ever experienced. And it was like 10 to 15 minutes long.
Yeah.
And then I felt great. And it can take multiple times to kind of
Like
get
build up.
get your pelvic floor to really relax. So ideally it lasts 3 to 6 months is my understanding. Sometimes it can be longer. I would say I'm at like the 3 month mark, and I'm signed up for my next visit, and I'm disappointed and a little bit nervous. But I was jumping on this like trampoline thing with my daughter, and for the first time I like felt my insides drop. Like it was the weirdest thing, but I have never had that expansion. So like I can do deadlifts in the gym, which were super triggering for my back before.
Yeah.
And I can ride in a car without hip pain after. And so, and like I said, no more cramps.
Yeah.
Like I don't know when my period is, my hormonal period is
Sure.
anymore with that. And I think I've had endobelly like twice since
That's
this.
incredible.
So it's just really incredible how much that tension can also play a huge role in our symptoms.
If you think about it, it could have been 10, 15 years that everything was so tight, and just trauma in those areas,
Yep.
and it doesn't want to relax, doesn't want to release.
Yep.
And this finally kind of gave it permission to be like, it's
Yes.
okay. Like
Yep. Yes.
that's
So,
thank you for sharing that. I mean, obviously very
yeah.
detailed and very personal, but I think it's very helpful to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So when I see patients in my practice that are saying, like, I still am cramping, still am not tolerating high intensity exercise, it's like, have you gone back to your surgeon and told them? Because if you don't go back, they don't know, they think you did great and you're
Right.
like healed and recovered, and there's other things that they can still do and recommend. So, like, urogynecology will do pelvic Botox as well. So, but yes, I would say likely for most patients, it would be an out of pocket cost, like a lot of
Yeah.
things with endo.
Yeah, of course. All of the things. Yeah, it's all very so expensive. Well then, so how did this I know you said you wanted to do nutrition before this and you like food and all that. How did what you've been through kind of change your, or did it change your career path? I guess I don't want to assume, but I know you work with endo patients, but how did that all happen? Was this happening in
Yeah.
conjunction? Tell me about, becoming a dietitian and nutritionist.
Yeah. So I think it was my junior or senior year of undergrad. I went to a nutrition conference and I heard a dietitian that I really admire still talk about nutrition for fertility. And she was speaking about how she was helping marathon runners get pregnant that were not eating enough, and how nutrition just can play such a role in normal ovulation, and just that just was so mind blowing to me. Like, you can just so positively impact people's lives with nutrition with this way, and it's like adding things to it.
Yeah,
And so I was like, that's what I want. I want to be her when I grow up. And then, our lives kind of lead in a different path. Like, my first job I got was in a nursing home, and then I worked in weight loss, and we're kind of like building up to this, but I still always had this dream, like, I'm going to be a fertility dietitian one day. Like, when my husband's out of grad school and I can do the entrepreneur thing, that is going to be my. And so about a year ago, I finally got that opportunity to start that journey. And I started marketing myself. I did weight loss for a long time. So I was like weight loss and women's health and just kind of like optimizing hormones. And I was getting a lot of weight loss patients, and I'm still kind of in that, like, finding answers for myself phase, like what's causing my bloating and all of that. So I'm
sure.
reading a lot of books, and I decided I was going to screen everybody for endo symptoms in my appointments because it's missed so much.
Yeah,
And I was hearing stories of women who were coming for weight loss, but like they were wearing diapers for their period.
yeah,
And it was like, honey, like, let's focus on something else right now. This
yeah.
isn't normal, but they don't even, just like me, like, oh, that's just been my life.
It's just normal, right? They
It's
don't know
just
any
normal.
different. Yeah,
So I had a handful of people like this, or like I had kind of been public in my personal Instagram about my endo journey, and had people kind of reach out like, I'm interested about, can you tell me more about what you've learned? And so I just decided there was so much bad information about diet for endometriosis, and such restrictive information. And there was just this huge hole in our knowledge about it that I really wanted to focus on that with my clients. Like, that was what was really bringing me joy in my practice, and what I really felt like people were needing. And I think in my journey, it's also really healing to get to share my story and be a part of other people's stories. It's been great for, yeah, kind of coming to terms with that, to like, don't go get a hysterectomy.
yeah, right. And
Trying to,
I mean, definitely
unless you want
rewarding,
one.
right? Of course, but you're helping people who, because I agree, there's so much like, do I eat gluten? Do I eat dairy? Should I not eat this? Anti-inflammation diet, no FODMAPs, no, and
Yeah,
it's just so overwhelming when you're already an endo patient dealing with a million other things, and then it's like
yeah,
it's just a swirl of what do I do?
yeah,
Right? And that's so challenging. And yeah, it's nice that I feel like podcast for me is like a little healing to deal with everything that I've been through, and you helping patients is probably very healing for you. And
Yeah,
are you testing and learning all of these things as well and then like passing them on to patients?
absolutely. This is like the best resource. What are you doing? What works for you?
You're like, actually, last week I tested this on myself and it worked. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that um, one of the things, so I offer discovery calls as a part of my practice just to make sure we're a good fit. And most people, when they come book a discovery call, it's like they already have their fists up and they are like so tense and so ready. Like, who are you? What are you going to do? Like, we are just on the defense and so stressed as people with endo. And so having that opportunity to make a connection with them, and like a big part of my practice is people just sharing their stories. Like,
Yeah.
people love to meet with me after their surgery and just kind of like decompress after that and have somebody that knows other endo patients and kind of bounce it off, because we don't get time like that with our doctors. They just can't give us that much time. And
Mm-mm.
so I love getting to be that resource for people as well. And yeah, I get to try out different things too.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, it's almost like giving patients like permission because they've been told, at least I can use myself as an example of so many things like don't eat red meat, don't do this, don't do that. And it's almost like, no, I'm actually a dietitian and I know scientifically what you can do and
Yeah.
try this, try that. And it's almost like you said, patients come in with their fists up because there's just, we've been fighting for so long for so many things. So I'm sure even just having the conversations and giving people permission food wise is very, very helpful for patients.
Oh my gosh. The trauma that people have around the restrictive diets that they've either read about or they've been given by usually their naturopath. Um, I gave somebody permission to eat fruit yesterday, and the smile on her face, like, I can have fruit. It was like the food matters. What we eat definitely matters. That's why I got into what I do. But for endo, a lot of times the food is really not the main problem. And that's a big part of my practice, is kind of demystifying that and giving people permission to feed their bodies and enjoy life, enjoy events, go there and eat the gluten and have a little bit of ice cream. And then like also make sure you're managing your stress and some of those other
Yeah.
things.
But that's incredible. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a good point or a good thing that I want to get into and giving some tips just for patients and your philosophies and everything. But yeah, what, I mean, the gluten thing I think is huge. And I know people who eat it and don't eat it that have endo, and people feel a certain way, and it's really individualized. It depends on you as the person, right? But yeah, what are some of the tips or things that you want patients with endo to know? Obviously, everybody knowing that it is very individualized, but just like the general misinformation about food.
Yeah, I think that one thing is the more you cut out of your diet, the less you are going to tolerate in your diet. So we have good gut bacteria and bad gut bacteria. And when we start to cut out lots and lots of things, then those bad guys that don't care what they eat just kind of take over. So if we've cut out all the gluten, we've cut out all the dairy, we've cut out fruit, we've cut out lots of different veggies to kind of help manage bloating, that is temporarily going to work. And then it's like we keep adding. I have patients who can't do eggs, dairy, gluten, red meat. It's like all you have left is chicken and some broccoli
Yep.
and rice.
Chicken and rice, chicken and rice.
Chicken and rice. And then they're starting to deal with things like nausea and loss of appetite and things like that. What happens, honestly, is they develop eating disorders unintentionally, and that can also really disrupt our gut and it can make it really painful to eat. And so, a big one is like try to be as least restrictive as possible and fill your plates up with nourishing food. So, try to get as many fruits and veggies in as you can. Try to get carbs, protein, and fat at every meal. Like, feed yourself. And that will make a world of difference. So kind of crowding out the less nourishing foods with the good ones and making room for everything. That is like my biggest tip, because the more we cut, the less we're going to tolerate.
Yeah. And if there are people listening that have cut a lot, everything's not over for them, right? They can slowly start to add things
Yes.
back in, right?
Yep. So when I'm working with patients, a lot of times we're working on a slow reintroduction of food. Most women I see, even that don't have endometriosis, are underfeeding, even if they are gaining weight. So I see this a lot. I want to lose weight. I've had this unexplained weight gain. My metabolism isn't working as well. If you are constantly running on less of a gas tank, then your body is going to find ways to cut, and it's going to slow your metabolism down. And that can also kind of impact how you're feeling. So we don't want to go from eating like 1,000 calories a day to 2,200 calories a day, but slowly adding things. Like if you haven't had gluten for years, maybe you have some croutons on your salad. Like we're not going from no gluten to 3 pieces of pizza.
Right. Right.
But
Yes. Because you're for sure probably not going to
then
feel
you're going
well
to feel
after that.
horrible.
Yeah.
But kind of slowly reintroducing things. And if you don't feel well, kind of check in what happened that day. Was it a stressful day? If you eat gluten on vacation and you feel fine, and then you come back and you don't tolerate gluten when you're at work, like, is it your job? Is it how busy you are? Are you overcommitted to things? Why don't we try it again on like a weekend day when you're off relaxing with your friends and check? If you feel good on that day, it's not the gluten, it's something else that's happening. It's that like chronic stress cycle. So it's definitely not over for you, but it could be good to reintroduce things kind of under the supervision of somebody that
Yeah.
can guide you through it and help you tune into your body and tune into your symptoms if you feel like you've kind of just lost touch with that.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And some people, maybe you can't tolerate gluten. I mean, I don't know. That's why it's good to work with someone if you're going to do that. All right. I don't know if you'll be able to answer this question. It's just so random. And I think you actually just kind of answered it. But how can there be days, depending on, I will use myself as an example, depending on my cycle, like how are there days where I can eat one food and I feel totally fine, but then I notice like the week leading up to like ovulation or my cycle or something, eggs are a perfect example. Sometimes I eat them fine, totally fine. But then when it's around the time of like either ovulation or my cycle, I feel nauseous. Like, and it's usually a consistent specific food. Why does that happen? Is it the food, or is it just because you're inflamed and you just don't feel well? Why?
It's probably the inflammation and what's happening with your hormones. So I don't think it's a foreign concept to anybody anymore, but maybe it is that your brain and your gut talk to each other. If you are stressed, if your gut is stressed, like those things are very much connected. And not to say that your symptoms are all in your head. Like if you're feeling pain with food, that's legitimate. Like
Yeah.
you are actually feeling the pain. But we may want to look at like what else is happening at those times. So one thing would be, sometimes it can be blamed on your cycle, but it's also like, are you traveling biweekly, or like what else is also happening in your life at those times?
Mm-hmm.
And with around ovulation, our estrogen is higher, and that can increase pain for some people. Like that can just increase pain perception. Some people do tend to get more bloated around ovulation. So one of the tips that I will have is kind of tracking your cycle. And if you know you're always bloated and painful, like maybe that's a week where you're a little bit more careful with triggers. Or what I do is just have gas management. So like I always have simethicone in my first gas X, or having some digestive enzymes just to kind of help eat up some of those gas bubbles that you're always producing, but you're just going to be more sensitive to when your hormones are a little bit changed.
That's a good tip.
And then same thing with when you're in your luteal phase, so that week before your period, you're having higher levels of progesterone, and that may be impacting people differently. So the hormones in the gut are also tied. And if we're having imbalances in our gut health, like we don't have enough of those good bacteria from, maybe we've been on antibiotics chronically, maybe we've done like a SIBO diet, maybe we've had surgeries, which they give us IV antibiotics for. All of that can disrupt your gut biome. as well as like chronic stress. And so the other thing is like you may need to just work on having some probiotics and feeding them regularly with fiber and color and protein.
Yeah. Those are all very, very helpful things. Well, for endo patients listening, and like I said, people listen from all over the world here, which thank you all so much for listening. What are your like top tips? You talk to patients all the time. What are some of the top advice that you would give people coming from your perspective that are dealing with this disease?
Yeah, I would say start with getting curious about your body. So start with cycle and symptom tracking. And along with that, pay attention to your life. Like what is happening that is stressful? Because most patients I see say that they feel much better when they're on vacation. So, start paying attention along with that tracking. Like, did you do anything that made you feel happy that day or anything that made you feel relaxed that day? And just get kind of curious about that. I think that's a really good starting place. When you're tracking foods, like it doesn't have to be calories, but a lot of the most common bloating foods for patients are actually vegetables. So, paying attention to like every time I eat a salad for lunch, I feel kind of crappy in the afternoon, kind of paying attention to that. And like, what if we tried cooked veggies for lunch? So I think that's a really good starting place is just get curious and maybe get curious for like 2 to 4 weeks and just really notice patterns with what's happening. And then from there, you can kind of implement small changes. I noticed that I don't eat breakfast. And if I don't, then I'm grazing all afternoon, or I'm having this energy dip where I'm looking for chocolate at 2 o'clock. So, what about if we eat more in the morning? What happens with that? So, start with getting curious and then slowly make changes. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. We're on this Our lives change all the time, and it's like a lifelong health journey just to implement these changes. And sometimes they're going to fall off, and then we slowly put the pieces back together and get back on.
Yeah. Be gentle with yourself,
Be
basically.
gentle with yourself. Yes. And then I would say, again, look outside of just food. So rather than thinking about what is the next thing that I need to cut to feel better food wise, what do you need to cut out of your lifestyle to feel better?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you overcommitted to volunteering? Do you have a new normal for, like what is going to make you tired? It may be different than your partner or your friend or even what you used to be able to do. But like, are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting enough time to relax? Are you getting time to move your body? Are you getting time to feed yourself? If you're not meeting those basic needs, do you have time to socialize with a loved one? If your job or your lifestyle or your volunteer commitments or your blog or whatever you're doing is not allowing you to meet your basic needs, I would start with cutting those things out before I started cutting a whole bunch of foods.
It's a really valid point. And I think, as someone who's definitely like cut a lot of foods out of my life, it seems almost easier to do that than to
Yeah,
like,
people will
obviously.
like, I'll take any supplement. I will spend any
Right.
amount of money on a nutrition program or a diet program.
Hmm.
I will exercise to death. Like, I will do all of these things, but I will not reduce my stress levels.
Yeah.
And, I had the luxury of living in Europe, and I think that really changed my perspective on work-life balance. And I came back to the US and I set some boundaries, and I was really shamed for that. Like, our culture doesn't really accept that, but we have to, as people with chronic inflammation, your lifestyle plays a really big role. And I would say most likely there may be food sensitivities and we may need to work on adding more things, but like probably the start of it is that food was not the issue.
Yeah. I think that's such a good tip. And obviously, it's very hard to be like, just don't do or, figure out how to reduce your stress. That's very important. But we all are going to work and kids, and there's always going to be a lot going on. But what I always tell people is like, like you said, what have you done for yourself today? Even if it's like a 10-minute meditation or lock yourself in the bathroom to get like just centered and breathing, like
Yeah.
find something you can do every day for you to help reduce the stress level.
Yeah. And some of it I think is like redefining what is normal. Like
Yeah.
it is really stressful for me to have my child in more than one activity per week. Like it totally disrupts my cycle and it's probably honestly stressful for her. So kind of changing that norm of like my kids are in 5 different things and I don't have time to cook dinner because I'm running them all over the place. Like really looking at like what are your core values and can you cut anything? Is there anything you can cut in your life? Can you say no to some things at work? Can you say no to a dinner date with friends because you just feel too tired and that's what you really want to do? Your body knows what it needs and really honoring that. I know this is like meant to be about nutrition, but my message is like nutrition matters. We need to eat the good things, limit sugar, limit processed foods. But there's nothing in my book that's like too bad to eat for endo. And the more you can eat, the more freedom you're going to have around food. And that's going to lower your stress levels as well.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Well, I I agree. I know this is still like you can feel my resistance. I'm sure right now
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know, but you're totally correct. Is there anything else you want to add or any books or tips? Or I also want everyone to know how to find you who's listening too. But yeah, is there anything that we missed that we didn't talk about that you want people to know?
Yeah, I would say in terms of books, there's not really any endo books that I love that for nutrition. They're very restrictive, and I think part of that is because they're trying to capture everybody's diet, everybody's things that could be bothering them, but the expense of that is that we can run into disordered eating, and it's really scary to me knowing how many teens have these symptoms that maybe they're getting put on these diets or like trying to do this and then developing really bad relationships with food and
Yeah.
just like starting that undernourishment cycle when they're still growing. So there's books that people like, but they're not ones I would recommend as a dietitian for the diet part. An anti-inflammatory recipe book or like a Mediterranean diet recipe book that's going to focus on healthy omega-3 fats and whole grains and lean proteins and vegetables. That is what I would go for if you are needing some resources. Anything like plant-based is going to be good, but we also need some really good proteins. They have a lot of vitamins and minerals and micronutrients in them. So yeah, I would look more for like Mediterranean anti-inflammatory diet and not things like paleo, autoimmune, carnivore, anything. If it's cutting a lot of food groups out, I would say skip it and just try adding things to your diet and see how that feels for you.
That's incredible. And I think probably a lot of people need to hear that, including myself. Like it's very important. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming
Yeah,
on. So
thank
how
you.
can we find you, or if listeners want to reach out or they want to talk to you or they want to come have a discovery call with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, so I am licensed across the US, but different states have different legalities for nutrition counseling, so that does matter. I have the list of the states I accept on my website, Sarah Ray, SarahRaeRDN.com or Pacific Northwest Endo Nutrition. You can also find me on Instagram at endonutrition.pnw. I don't do TikTok because that's one of my stress management in my life strategies.
Understood. Yes.
But yeah, my website, I love blogging, and my phone number is on my website as well, and my email, so they can contact me anyway. And I do accept insurance, and just my little plug that many nutrition visits are covered by insurance unless you live in Michigan.
Sorry, Michiganders. I'm a Michigander. But yes, that's super helpful and incredible. And don't worry, everyone, if you're driving or walking and listening to this, I will link all of these things in the show notes. I don't know about you all, but when I'm listening to podcasts, I'm like, oh no, I gotta go back and like get all that info. I will link everything in the show notes. Sarah, I appreciate you so much. And thank you so much for coming on and giving us permission to add more versus reduce more. It's
absolutely.
very
It's my
helpful.
pleasure. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to plug for eating more with endo.
it's a message. I feel like I work in marketing, as some people who listen to this might know. I feel like it's like a marketing campaign: eat more, not less, for endo. So yeah, I think it's very important, and I appreciate the work that you're doing and helping patients. And I'm really sorry for what happened to you in the beginning of your journey, but so grateful for people like you paying it forward and giving the right information out and trying to help patients.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. If you like this episode, please give us 5 stars wherever you're listening. Please share it. I appreciate you all so much for being here. I hope you're feeling well, and I am sending you all good vibes. Take care.